There is a chill that sits deeper than winter. It hums beneath the skin when you find your name missing from a place you once called home. The first snow came early that year. It powdered my porch steps, softened the sharp edges of my street, covered up the cracks in the walkway like a mercy. Inside my apartment, the heater rattled. A candle flickered near the window. I had wrapped a single string of warm white lights around my bookshelf, trying to mimic what I imagined their house looked like now: bright windows, laughter bleeding through the walls, every room alive with someone's voice. No one called me that week. Not a sister asking if I'd bring pie, not a father asking if I'd drive him to the store for wine. The phone stayed still, screen black. I sat at the kitchen table longer than I needed to, staring at the single plate I'd set for myself, the fork laid neatly beside it, the cup waiting for nothing. Somewhere, my mother would be fussing about the gravy. My sister would be tossing her hair over her shoulder, rolling her eyes at an old joke. They'd lift their glasses and fill them to the rim, leaning into the warmth of belonging. And here, silence, warm only by the cat at my feet and the promise that maybe next year they'd remember I existed. Maybe next year they'd find my name. Outside, the streetlight flickered. I pressed my palm against the window pane and whispered to it, "I'm still here." I didn't know then what would arrive 3 days later, how a single envelope would change the temperature of the room forever. The snow had grown restless by then, piling at my door like an unspoken warning. It made the world so still I could hear my own heartbeat when the knock came. It wasn't a letter slid politely into my mailbox, not this time. It was a courier, red nose, eyes tired, boots dusted white. He looked at me the way people do when they know they're delivering something sour. He handed it over without a word, and the envelope was heavy enough to bend in my hand. Inside, the heat hissed through the vents. I turned the envelope over once, twice, my family's crest embossed on the flap. We were never royalty, but my mother loved touches of grandeur. Even our cruelty came dressed in gold leaf. I didn't open it at the door. I placed it beside my tea. The steam from the cup curled around its corners, as if trying to soften it for me. But paper does not forgive so easily. When I finally tore it open, my eyes caught the figure first. $52,000. For a car I'd never driven, for a sister who hadn't looked me in the eye since last spring. A polite note beneath the sum: family means sacrifice. We knew you'd understand. They hadn't asked if I'd eaten dinner alone. They hadn't wondered if I'd missed the smell of pine in their living room. But they'd remembered my bank account. They'd remembered my usefulness. I set the letter down, touched my fingertip to the ink, felt its weight press into me. Then I laughed quietly, the kind of laugh that turns itself inside out before it escapes. Some debts aren't meant to be paid. Some debts rewrite the ledger altogether. That night, sleep would not come. The envelope lay open on my table like a fresh wound, but my mind was somewhere else, pacing the rooms of a house I no longer entered. I remembered my sister's laugh, the way it used to sound when we were young, tangled in blankets on the floor, telling secrets about our parents behind closed doors. Back then, she'd slip her cold feet against my warm ones and whisper, "Promise you'll never leave me." It was strange how time edits the script. The same mouth that once pressed secrets into my ear now crafted invoices and demands, scribbled in my mother's sharp handwriting. They had taught her well family was a garden to pluck bare, season after season, until nothing but thorns remained. I rose from my chair and moved to the window. Outside, the streetlights flickered on, bathing the snow in a dull gold. Somewhere behind that snow, they were pouring wine, stringing lights, taking photos to post later, proof that family was whole, perfect, unbroken. Proof that I was no longer needed except as a signature on a check. My tea had gone cold. I poured it down the drain, watched it swirl away like warmth leaving the body. I would not sleep tonight. Instead, I sat back down at the table, pulled a pen toward me, and flipped the envelope over. On its blank side, I began to write. A plan at first in pieces, lines, names, dates, then the pieces found each other like iron filings drawn to a magnet. If they wanted my sacrifice, they would have it. But not the way they imagined. They'd invited me to a debt. I would reply with an inheritance they could never spend. The house was quiet. But inside me, something hummed, a promise. Waking up. Morning slipped in like an apology. Pale light stretched across my kitchen table, catching the edge of the envelope, the words family means sacrifice glinting beneath my scribbled notes. I hadn't slept. I didn't need to. Some storms keep you awake and sharpen you in the same breath. I dressed with purpose, dark wool coat, scarf tucked tight against my throat, boots that crunched over the fresh snow as I stepped outside. In my pocket, my phone buzzed once, twice, my mother's name on the screen, then gone. I didn't answer. Not yet. Instead, I walked 2 blocks to the small cafe where the owner knew my name, but not my stories. I ordered black coffee, found a seat by the window, and dialed a number I hadn't called in 3 years. It rang twice before a voice, husky with sleep and suspicion, answered, "Well, look who died and called from the grave." I almost smiled. Some people are graves you visit willingly. "I need a favor," I said simply. A short laugh on the other end, not kind, but not cruel either. "You always do." I stirred my coffee slowly, watching the snow drift in lazy spirals outside. "This one's worth your time." A silence settled. Then, "I'm listening." I told him everything, the party I wasn't invited to, the invoice sent like a knife in soft paper, the sister with the new car and the parents with the old tricks. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't curse. Every word was a quiet note in a song they never thought I'd sing again. He asked only one question when I finished. "Are you sure you want to do this?" I traced the rim of my cup with my finger. Outside, someone's dog barked at the wind. "Yes," I said, "but I don't want noise. Just precision." He exhaled, the sound like static. "Then you called the right grave." I ended the call, finished my coffee, and stepped back into the winter that no longer felt so cold. By the time I returned home, the first flakes of evening snow had begun to settle on my shoulders like quiet witnesses. I brushed them off at the door, stepped inside, and laid out every document I owned across my dining table: birth certificates, old pay stubs, tax returns, title deeds. Each slip of paper was a fragment of a story my family had tried to erase. They thought they'd buried me under pity and shame. But they forgot I'd learned to keep receipts, literal and otherwise. I turned on the small lamp above the table, its yellow light bathing the cold whiteness in warmth. I traced my finger over signatures, my father's crooked scrawl, my mother's tight loops, my own name, always at the edges, always an afterthought. I found the file they'd sent, invoice for vehicle expenses. $52,000, dressed up in polite accounting language and thinly veiled threats. They called it family obligation. I called it fuel. I called my lawyer next, a soft-voiced woman named Alara, who always signed her emails warm regards even when sending cease and desists. She listened in silence, the click of her pen the only sound as I spoke. When I finished, she cleared her throat. "You've waited for this, haven't you?" she asked, not unkindly. "I didn't wait," I said. "I prepared." We spoke for an hour. By the end, my dining table was a war map of bank statements and old secrets. Alara promised me 2 things. It would be silent, and it would sting. I thanked her. When I hung up, I looked around my small apartment, the second-hand bookshelf, the chipped coffee mug on the counter, the photo of me at my first real job, framed but dusty. They'd sent me an invoice like they were selling my own bones back to me. So I gathered every scrap of proof that their car, their trips, their new gifts came not from love, but from me, the child they'd laughed out the door and expected to crawl home. I pressed my palm flat against the last page. The cold paper whispered back, "Let them open this envelope. Let them choke on it." I switched off the lamp and sat in the hush of my tiny living room. The snow kept falling outside, soft, slow, unstoppable. 3 days passed like a held breath. I moved through my life with practiced calm, work, errands, polite nods to neighbors who had no idea of the storm I was folding into an envelope each night. Then, one evening, an email slid into my inbox like an afterthought. Family Christmas dinner. Mandatory. No greeting, no warmth, just the usual demand dressed up in fake tinsel and forced goodwill. I read it twice, each word cutting deeper than the last. Mandatory. They'd cut me out of every memory that mattered: birthdays, graduations, even my wedding day, but when it suited them, they summoned me like a servant. At the end of the email was an address, my childhood home, the one they'd renovated with money they once borrowed, swore they'd repay, then forgot. I didn't reply. Instead, I printed the message and laid it beside the fat envelope of documents I'd prepared. The invitation felt like a joke, but it was exactly what I needed: an audience, all of them under one roof, smug and unsuspecting. I spent that night going through every detail with Alara over the phone. She asked if I was certain, if there was any part of me that wanted to open old wounds only to salt them myself. They never close the wounds, I said, my voice quiet but steady. I'm just giving them the courtesy of seeing what they made. Alara didn't try to change my mind. Instead, she told me what time the courier would arrive. She told me where to stand, what to say, and more importantly, what not to say. By midnight, everything was ready. The envelope sat on my kitchen table, thick with history, decades of borrowed money, unpaid debts, and names they'd signed in my place when it suited them. I poured myself a glass of water, looked at the snow gathering at my window, and whispered into the empty room, "Merry Christmas." When you plan your own resurrection, you learn to savor the burial first. Christmas Eve arrived shivering in frost. I stood at the edge of the old driveway, the house spilling warm light onto the snow-dusted lawn, the same house they'd bragged about in neighborhood whispers, the same door they'd closed to me so many winters ago. Inside, laughter bloomed and fell like brittle ornaments. I could hear my sister's high, brittle giggle, my father's voice booming in the way he did when he wanted to remind the room who paid the bills. I wondered if he remembered who'd really paid for the marble countertops and the imported car in the garage. I stepped through the front door without knocking. I didn't need permission tonight. The foyer smelled of cinnamon and expensive wine. I could feel eyes shift my way, cold surprise dripping off every stare. A cousin paused mid-sip. An uncle nudged another. My mother, wrapped in silk and small cruelties, raised her eyebrows, but said nothing. No warm welcomes. No apologies. Just a polite hush, like a church before confession. "Oh, you came," my sister said, her voice dripping with the sugar of false relief. She wore a new necklace, a glint of diamonds that I recognized from an old statement marked paid by you-know-who. "You didn't RSVP," my father added. He said it like a threat disguised as etiquette. I slipped my coat off and laid the thick envelope on the console table by the door, right next to the crystal bowl of keys and a bowl of sugared almonds no one ate. "I didn't think I needed to," I said softly, my eyes on the tree glittering in the corner, all gold and glass, hiding no gifts for me beneath its branches. I moved through the room like I belonged, because tonight I did. I caught my mother watching me, her eyes narrowing as I passed the piano where I once played carols, small and trembling, for an applause that never came. I greeted everyone with the warmth they never gave me. I smiled at the cousins who'd blocked my number. I complimented the new drapes my money had bought. I lifted a glass of their best champagne and tasted it slowly, as if it were mine, because it was. They watched me, all of them, the air taut with the question no one dared ask, "Why is she here?" They'd find out soon enough. In that room, under tinsel and crystal and tight smiles, I felt the quiet heat of something they could never steal back, the power to stand among them and know, for once, I wasn't the one out in the cold. I lifted my glass again, and for the first time in years, I toasted myself. Dinner dragged on like an old song out of tune. I sat at the long, polished table, the same table they'd once told me I didn't deserve to sit at. Silver clinked, wine flowed. Polite laughter rattled against the walls, but none of it touched me. I tasted every sip like a secret. They talked over me, about promotions they hadn't earned, vacations they hadn't paid for, gifts they'd given each other with my hidden blessing behind the bow. Each word was a thread pulled tight in my chest, but I kept my smile pinned in place. My sister tapped her glass for silence. "A toast," she said, her diamond necklace catching the chandelier's glow, my chandelier. "To family, the only ones who really matter." The room clapped politely. A few eyes darted to me, the ghost at the table. I raised my glass too. "To family," I echoed, my voice soft, silk wrapped around a blade. My father turned, half amused. "And what are you grateful for, exactly?" he asked, his tone sharp enough to draw blood if I let it. I looked around that table, at faces that had once shut me out like a draft in winter. I looked at the house, the paintings, the furniture, the sparkle of wealth that dripped off every corner like icicles about to break. I'm grateful, I said, for lessons learned, for debts remembered, and for the chance to finally give something back. A murmur. Forks paused midair. My mother's hand fluttered to her pearls. I reached into my bag and placed the envelope at the center of the table, beside the roasted goose and candles flickering like tiny watchful eyes. "What's that?" my sister asked, too bright, too nervous. I met her stare. "A gift," I said, my smile gentle, my voice steady. "The only one you'll remember after tonight." No one moved to open it. They just stared at me, at the heavy paper, at the truth they'd spent years pretending didn't exist. I lifted my glass one last time. "Merry Christmas," I said, my words clear enough to shatter the ornaments behind me. Then I drank not to them, but to the quiet ruin they'd soon find waiting in my neat signature. The envelope sat untouched for a moment, an ugly thing in beautiful wrapping. I let the silence press down on the room like fresh snow, muffling every polite word, every false laugh. My father reached for it first. His hands, once so steady counting other people's money, trembled just enough for me to notice. He pulled the flap open with the care of a man who knew deep down that this was no gift at all. Papers slid out like a blade from a sheath, white pages stamped with ink, heavy with signatures and seals. He flipped through them. I watched his eyes skip, stumble, catch. Property transfer. Accounts closed. Assets liquidated. Paid in full. He looked at me, the way a man looks at a ghost he thought he'd buried deep in the garden. His lips moved, but no sound came. My mother leaned in, reading over his shoulder, the pearls at her throat rising and falling too fast. My sister snatched the last page from his hand. Her painted nails tapped the lines her eyes couldn't make sense of. "What is this?" she demanded, her voice cracking like thin ice. I didn't answer. I let the paper speak, the proof that the house they gathered in, the cars they drove, the club memberships they bragged about, all of it had one quiet heartbeat, me. And I had turned it off. I watched them do the math in real time. Watched them understand that the cars were no longer theirs to park, the vacations were over, the credit lines closed like doors they'd slammed in my face. A cousin coughed, clearing his throat into the graveyard hush. An uncle pushed back his chair, but didn't stand. No one dared speak my name. Not now. Not as the truth settled over them like dust on a coffin. I leaned back in my chair, tasting my wine sweeter now than any dessert they'd ever denied me. No shouting. No plates thrown. Just the soft, exquisite sound of a kingdom realizing the walls were made of borrowed stone. The night wore thin, the laughter hollowed out. I stood, the chair scraping softly against the polished floor, a gentle sound that carried more weight than thunder. Their eyes followed me, a tangled mix of disbelief, anger, and a hint of something like regret, though it was too late for that. I gathered my coat with deliberate calm, folding it over my arm like a final farewell. My husband's hand brushed mine, a quiet anchor amid the storm of unspoken words. The front door closed behind us with a soft click, sealing away years of neglect and silent battles. Outside, the cool air wrapped around me like a promise, clean, clear, unbroken. No goodbyes were needed. They were echoes now, fading into the past. As we walked away, my daughter's small hand slipped into mine. Her smile was a quiet vow that love, even when broken, can rebuild itself stronger. The road ahead was unknown, but for the first time, it was mine to choose.